Sitting beside my unconscious mother's hospital bed at 3 in the morning, her ventilator rhythmically breathing life into her frail body, my phone buzzed with a text that shattered my world. Secured my future, my husband Brad wrote, followed by a photo of him and his secretary Amanda boarding a plane to Brazil. My hands trembled as I read his next message. Sold your precious family estate for $2.5 million. Thanks for the inheritance, darling. I stared at Mom's pale face, then typed back with steady fingers. Fascinating. The fluorescent lights in the ICU waiting room hummed overhead as I stared at my phone screen in complete disbelief. Brad's smug selfie with Amanda at what appeared to be an airport gate burned into my retinas. Behind them, I could make out a departure board showing flights to South America. My heart hammered against my ribcage as the full magnitude of his betrayal began to sink in. I had been living at this hospital for 3 weeks straight, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, eating vending machine sandwiches, and holding my mother's hand while she fought for her life after her massive stroke. Meanwhile, my husband of 7 years had been systematically destroying everything I held dear. With shaking fingers, I called our family attorney, Mr. Hartwell. His voicemail picked up immediately. Of course it did. It was barely dawn on a Tuesday. I left a frantic message, then immediately dialed our bank. The automated system cheerfully informed me that our checking account balance was $14.37. Our savings account showed zero. Even our emergency fund had been completely drained. Panic clawed at my throat as I called our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street from our family's Victorian estate. She had been watching the property while I stayed at the hospital with Mom. "Jody, honey." Mrs. Patterson's worried voice crackled through the phone. "I've been trying to reach you for days. There have been trucks there constantly, men loading furniture boxes, everything. I thought maybe you were moving, but when I asked that husband of yours, he just smiled and said it was none of my business." "What do you mean, trucks?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Moving trucks, dear, big ones. They've been there since Thursday, maybe Friday. And yesterday I saw a real estate sign go up. It said sold right across the front. I was so confused because I never saw it listed for sale." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the sterile hospital floor. Other families in the waiting room looked up from their own private hells to stare at me. I retrieved my phone with trembling hands and immediately called the estate. No answer. The landline that had been in my family for decades just rang and rang. I tried Brad's cell phone next. Straight to voicemail. Amanda's number, which I knew from when she called about Brad's work schedule, also went directly to voicemail. Fighting back tears, I called Mr. Hartwell's emergency line. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. What's happening? Is it your mother?" "Mr. Hartwell, please tell me Brad couldn't have sold my grandmother's estate without my signature. Please tell me there's some legal protection." A long pause. "Jody, slow down. What exactly are you saying happened?" Through hiccuping sobs, I explained everything. Brad's texts, the missing money, Mrs. Patterson's report about the moving trucks and the sold sign. Mr. Hartwell listened without interruption, his breathing growing heavier with each detail. This is very serious, Jody. The estate was inherited property in your name only. Your husband would have needed power of attorney or forged documents to execute any sale. Where are you right now?" "At the hospital with Mom. She's been unconscious for 3 weeks." "But I need you to come to my office immediately. Bring any documentation you have regarding the estate ownership. We need to file emergency injunctions before this gets any worse." I looked at my mother's pale face, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. "I can't leave her." Jody, if what you're telling me is accurate, your husband has committed multiple felonies. Every hour we wait makes it harder to recover your assets. Is there someone who can stay with your mother? My mind raced. My only close family was my estranged Uncle Thomas' mom's brother, whom I hadn't spoken to since their bitter argument 5 years ago over my grandmother's funeral arrangements. But desperate times called for desperate measures. I'll figure something out, I whispered. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Mr. Hartwell's office, still wearing the same clothes I'd slept in at the hospital for the past 2 days. His secretary had come in early to help us access the property records. This is worse than I initially thought, Mr. Hartwell said, sliding documents across his mahogany desk. According to these county records, the sale was finalized yesterday afternoon for exactly $2.5 million. The buyer appears to be a family named the Hendersons, who seem to be legitimate purchasers with no connection to your husband. How is that possible? I never signed anything. He handed me a copy of what appeared to be a power of attorney document with my forged signature. Someone did a very convincing job replicating your handwriting. This gives your husband broad authority to handle all your financial affairs during your mother's medical emergency. But I never signed this. I never even saw this document before right now. I believe you. The question is proving it's a forgery in time to stop this transaction from becoming irreversible. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Jody Thompson. An unfamiliar male voice. Ah, yes. Nix, this is Gary Winters from Winters Realty. I handled the sale of your beautiful Victorian property. I just wanted to personally thank you for choosing our agency and confirm that all closing documents were processed correctly. Your husband mentioned you were dealing with a family medical emergency, so I wanted to reach out directly to make sure everything met your satisfaction. I want the sale reversed immediately. I said, my voice stronger than I felt. That property was sold without my knowledge or consent. A pause. Ma'am, I'm afraid that's not possible. The sale was completed with proper documentation and your husband's power of attorney. The buyers have already taken possession and begun moving in. That power of attorney is forged. Ma'am, I'd be happy to discuss this with your legal representation, but I assure you, all our paperwork was in order. He hung up before I could respond. Mr. Hartwell's expression had grown increasingly grim as he continued reading through the documents. Jody, there's something else, something much worse. Well, what could possibly be worse than losing my family home? The sale included not just the main house, but also the adjacent 40 acres of undeveloped land. According to these papers, your husband sold both parcels as a package deal. My blood turned to ice. The 40 acres, but that's where what, Jody? I couldn't speak for a moment. My grandmother had made me promise never to tell anyone about what was buried in the family safe, but those days of keeping secrets were over. Mr. Hartwell, we need to go to the estate immediately. There's something my husband doesn't know about, something that makes this theft worth far more than $2.5 million. The drive to my family estate felt like traveling to a crime scene, which I suppose it was. Mr. Hartwell followed behind me in his silver sedan as we made the 20-minute journey from downtown to the tree-lined neighborhood where my family had lived for 4 generations. The sight that greeted us made my stomach lurch. A bright yellow moving truck sat in the circular driveway, and 2 men in coveralls were loading what appeared to be my grandmother's antique dining room set into the back. A cheerful "Sold" banner stretched across the elegant wraparound porch, where I'd spent countless childhood summers reading and drinking lemonade. A woman in her 30s emerged from the front door, directing the movers with obvious excitement. She spotted us immediately and walked over with a friendly smile. You must be the previous owners. I'm Linda Henderson. My family and I are just so thrilled about this house. It's absolutely perfect for our needs. I fought back tears. Mrs. Henderson, I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake. This sale was conducted fraudulently. Her face fell. What do you mean we've already put down our entire life savings? The realtor assured us everything was completely legitimate. Mr. Hartwell stepped forward, introducing himself and explaining the legal situation as gently as possible. Mrs. Henderson's excitement transformed into obvious panic as she realized she might lose her dream home. But we signed all the papers yesterday. Our realtor, Mr. Winters, said the owners were eager to sell quickly because of a family emergency. My husband already gave notice at his job in Denver so we could move here. Mrs. Henderson, you and your family are victims in this situation just as much as my client is, Mr. Hartwell assured her. We'll work to make sure you're not financially harmed by this fraud. We left Mrs. Henderson to call her own attorney and headed around to the back of the house where I knew the old carriage house had been converted into a workshop and storage space. My heart sank when I saw that the side door was hanging open, the lock obviously forced. Inside, chaos reigned. Boxes of my family's belongings were scattered everywhere, some open and rifled through others hastily taped shut. It looked like Brad had been searching for something specific. What exactly are we looking for, Jody? Mr. Hartwell asked. I made my way to the far corner where my grandmother's old steamer trunk had always sat. To my relief, it was still there, though the brass lock had been pried open and the contents scattered. Help me look for a small wooden jewelry box, I said, dropping to my knees and sorting through old photographs and documents. It's mahogany with brass corners about the size of a cigar box. We searched for 10 minutes before I found it shoved beneath a pile of my college textbooks. The lid hung loosely on its hinges, clearly forced open, but incredibly the contents appeared untouched. Thank God, I whispered, pulling out a thick manila envelope and a small leather journal. What are these? I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were geological survey reports dated 15 years earlier, commissioned by my grandmother and conducted by Colorado State University's Geology Department. The technical language was dense, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The 40 acres of undeveloped land behind our house contained a significant deposit of rare earth minerals, specifically lithium and cesium, with an estimated value of $12.2 million. Mr. Hartwell whistled low. Your grandmother knew about this. She never told anyone except me, and only right before she died 3 years ago. She said the family would need it someday, but that we should wait for the right time when rare earth minerals became more valuable. With all the electric car manufacturing now, I trailed off, the implications hitting me fully. And Brad had no idea about this when he sold the property? No way. Grandmother kept this information locked in her safe. I'm the only one who knew the combination. Mr. Hartwell was already reaching for his phone. We need to contact the buyers immediately and inform them about the mineral rights. This changes everything about the value of this fraud. But as I continued examining the contents of the jewelry box, I discovered something that changed everything even more dramatically. Hidden beneath the geological surveys was my grandmother's original will, written in her distinctive handwriting and properly notarized. Mr. Hartwell, look at this. The will was clear and unambiguous. My grandmother had specifically excluded all spouses from any inheritance rights to the property. The estate was to pass to her direct descendants only with explicit language stating that no husband or wife of any beneficiary could claim ownership or control over any portion of the property or its assets. This means Brad was never legally entitled to any part of the estate, regardless of power of attorney. Mr. Hartwell said, his voice growing excited. Even if he'd legitimately obtained power of attorney, He wouldn't have had the right to sell property he never owned. Oh, but there's more. I pulled out another document from the envelope. Look at this trust document. The mineral rights weren't even included in my inheritance. They were held in a separate family trust established in 1978, which required unanimous consent from 3 trustees to sell or lease the mining rights myself, my mother, and my estranged Uncle Thomas. But without all 3 signatures, those mineral rights can't be legally sold, I said, my voice barely containing my growing excitement. Brad sold property he never owned that contains minerals he couldn't legally sell. Mr. Hartwell was already dialing his phone. We need to contact the district attorney's office immediately. This isn't just fraud anymore, this is organized crime. As we drove back toward town, my phone rang. Gary Winters again. Mrs. Thompson, I understand there may be some confusion about the property sale. I'd like to arrange a meeting to clarify any misunderstandings. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Winters. You helped my husband sell property he didn't own using forged documents. Ma'am, I assure you all our documentation was properly verified. Perhaps we could meet this afternoon to review the paperwork together. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I'll be meeting with law enforcement instead. That seems unnecessary. These matters are often resolved more efficiently through private negotiation. I hung up and immediately shared the conversation with Mr. Hartwell. He's fishing to find out how much you know, he said grimly. Jody, I think your husband was specifically targeted. This Gary Winters character specializes in these quick undermarket sales. I'm going to have my assistant research his business practices. 2 hours later, we had our answer. Gary Winters Realty had been involved in 17 property sales in the past 2 years, all involving families dealing with medical emergencies or other crises. All the sales were significantly below market value. All involved buyers who seemed legitimate but disappeared from contact shortly after the transactions. He's been running this scam systematically, Mr. Hartwell explained. Target vulnerable families, find a way to compromise a family member, forge the necessary documents, and then disappear with the profits. But how did he know about our situation? How did he know Mom was in the ICU? That's what we need to figure out. Someone provided him with inside information about your family's circumstances. I thought back to Brad's secretary, Amanda, how she'd been unusually helpful during Mom's medical crisis, offering to handle paperwork and coordinate with insurance companies, how she'd ask detailed questions about our family finances and property holdings, claiming she needed the information for emergency contact purposes. Amanda wasn't just Brad's mistress, I realized. She was gathering intelligence for the scam. Mr. Hartwell nodded grimly. We need to track down her real identity and her connection to Gary Winters. But first, we need to figure out where your husband really is, because something tells me that plane to Brazil was just for show. The next morning, I sat across from attorney Sarah Wells in her downtown office, surrounded by boxes of documents and evidence we'd gathered in just 24 hours. Sarah specialized in complex fraud cases, and Mr. Hartwell had called her in when it became clear we were dealing with organized criminal activity rather than simple marital betrayal. The good news is that you have an extremely strong case. Sarah began spreading photographs and legal documents across her conference table. The forged power of attorney, the invalid sale of trust property, and the systematic targeting of your family during a medical crisis all constitute serious federal crimes. What's the bad news? Well, the bad news is that legitimate buyers have moved into your property and they have legal rights too. Even though the sale was fraudulent, they acted in good faith. Forcing them out immediately could result in significant legal liability for you. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of 3 weeks without proper sleep. What about the mineral rights? Can't we at least secure those? Absolutely. The mineral rights were never validly sold because the trust requires 3 signatures. We'll file an emergency injunction today to prevent any mining or development on that land. But recovering the house itself will be more complicated. Sarah's assistant knocked and entered with a fresh stack of documents. The research you requested on Gary Winters and Amanda Martinez. Martinez. I looked up sharply. I thought her last name was Johnson. It is legally, but her maiden name is Martinez, and she's Gary Winters' sister. The pieces began falling into place. Amanda had systematically gathered information about our family's financial situation, property holdings, and personal circumstances. She'd used her position as Brad's secretary to access confidential documents and learn about my mother's medical condition. Then she passed everything to her brother Gary, who had approached Brad with what probably seemed like a legitimate business opportunity. How long had she been working for Brad? Sarah asked. I tried to remember. She started about 8 months ago, right after his previous secretary retired. She was so efficient, so helpful with everything. Brad said she was the best secretary he'd ever had. I'll bet she was, Sarah said dryly. She was probably paid very well for the intelligence she gathered. My phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Mom's condition had improved slightly overnight, and the doctors wanted to speak with me about adjusting her treatment plan. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope about something. I need to get back to the hospital, I told Sarah. But first, what's our next step legally? We file criminal complaints against all 3 of them today: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and theft. The district attorney's office is already interested based on the preliminary information we've provided. But Jody, I need to prepare you for something. What? Your husband and his accomplices have had several days' head start. If they really are in Brazil, extradition could take months or even years. And if they've moved the money to offshore accounts, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult. I thought about Brad's smug selfie at the airport. Something about it had bothered me from the beginning, but I couldn't quite identify what. Kine, can you get copies of those airport photos? I want to examine them more carefully. Of course. Why, I don't know yet. Something just feels wrong about them. 2 hours later, I was back at my mother's bedside when something miraculous happened. Her eyes fluttered open and she squeezed my hand weakly. Jody! Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in weeks. I'm here, Mom. You're going to be okay. She tried to speak again, but the words were too faint to understand. I leaned closer, holding my breath. The papers, she whispered, behind the grandfather clock. What papers, Mom? What are you talking about? But she had already drifted back into unconsciousness, leaving me with more questions than answers. I immediately called Mrs. Patterson and asked her to meet me at the estate. Whatever Mom was trying to tell me, it was important enough for her to use her limited strength to communicate it. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the driveway when I arrived, holding a spare key she'd kept for emergencies. The house felt strange and hollow, with most of the furniture gone and the Henderson family's boxes stacked in corners. The grandfather clock stood in the front hallway, just as it had for decades. I'd never thought to look behind it, but when Mrs. Patterson helped me move it away from the wall, we discovered a small panel that had been painted over so many times it was almost invisible. Oh, I never knew this was here, Mrs. Patterson marveled as I carefully pried the panel open with a screwdriver from the kitchen. Inside was a manila envelope containing documents that made my heart race. Property deeds going back to the 1800s, but also more recent papers that I didn't recognize. banking documents, investment records, and most shocking of all, a letter in my grandmother's handwriting dated just 2 months before her death. The letter was addressed to me. My dearest Jody, it began, if you're reading this, then something has happened to threaten our family's legacy. I pray you never need this information, but I cannot leave this world without ensuring you have every tool to protect what generations of our family have built. The letter went on to detail not just the mineral rights I already knew about, but also a series of investments and property holdings I'd never heard of. Apparently, my grandmother had been far wealthier than anyone realized, with assets carefully hidden and protected through multiple trusts and corporate structures. Most importantly, the letter revealed that the Mineral Rights Trust had a fourth trustee I'd never known about, my Uncle Thomas, my mother's brother. But more than that, Thomas wasn't just a trustee. He was also a retired FBI investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Thomas will know what to do, the letter concluded. He has copies of all these documents and the legal authority to act on the family's behalf if needed. I didn't tell you about his role because I hoped you'd never need it. But if you're reading this, contact him immediately. Tell him the clock has struck midnight and he'll understand. Mrs. Patterson was reading over my shoulder, her eyes wide. Your uncle was FBI. I had no idea. Mom and Thomas had such a bitter fight when grandmother died. I thought it was just family drama, but maybe there was more to it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Thomas's number for the first time in 5 years. He answered on the second ring. Jody, is everything all right? How's your mother? Uncle Thomas, the clock has struck midnight. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had completely changed, becoming crisp and professional. Where are you right now? At the estate. Uncle Thomas Brad sold our property using forged documents. He stole everything and disappeared with his secretary. I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't touch anything else in that hiding place and don't discuss this conversation with anyone. This is bigger than you realize, Jody. Much bigger. After hanging up, I stared at the documents spread across the dining room table. According to these papers, our family's true net worth was close to $40 million, carefully accumulated and protected over generations. The Victorian estate was just the tip of the iceberg. But as I studied the investment records more carefully, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Several of the accounts showed unauthorized access attempts in recent months. Someone had been trying to break into my grandmother's hidden assets. Someone who knew they existed. Someone who had been planning this theft for far longer than 8 months. My phone rang, unknown number. Jody Thompson. Yes. This is Detective Martinez with the County Sheriff's Office. I understand you filed complaints regarding fraudulent property sales. Yes, my attorney, Sarah Wells, filed the paperwork this morning. Ma'am, I need to inform you that we've discovered some irregularities in your case. Could you come to the station this afternoon to answer some additional questions? Something in his tone made me suspicious. What kind of irregularities? It's better if we discuss this in person. Can you be here by 3 o'clock? I'll bring my attorney, or that won't be necessary for these preliminary questions. I hung up feeling deeply uneasy. Detective Martinez shared a last name with Amanda Martinez. In a county of over 500,000 people, that seemed like quite a coincidence. I called Sarah Wells immediately. Don't go anywhere without me, she said firmly. If they want to question you, they can do it with your attorney present. This sounds like intimidation, not legitimate police work. As I waited for both Sarah and Uncle Thomas to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something much more organized and dangerous than simple real estate fraud. The attempted access to my grandmother's hidden accounts, the coordinated timing of the theft during Mom's medical crisis, and now a detective with the same surname as one of the criminals. My phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Sarah immediately. Whatever we were up against, they were clearly watching our every move. But they had made one crucial mistake. They didn't know about Uncle Thomas, and they certainly didn't know about the $40 million in hidden assets that were about to become our weapons in this fight. The clock had indeed struck midnight, but morning was coming. Uncle Thomas arrived at the estate looking nothing like the broken man I remembered from our grandmother's funeral. Gone was the stooped posture and defeated expression. In their place stood a tall, commanding figure with sharp eyes that missed nothing as he surveyed the scene. "Show me everything," he said without preamble. I spread the documents across the dining room table while Mrs. Patterson made coffee, her hands shaking slightly from the morning's revelations. Thomas examined each paper methodically, occasionally making notes on a small pad he pulled from his jacket pocket. "Your grandmother was brilliant," he said finally. "She created a financial fortress that would be almost impossible to penetrate legally. But your husband and his accomplices found the one weak point you." "What do you mean?" "They couldn't access the hidden assets directly, so they targeted the one piece of visible property that might lead them to everything else. The estate sale was never about $2.5 million, Jody. It was about getting access to this house so they could search for exactly what you found behind the grandfather clock." Sarah Wells arrived as Thomas was explaining the scope of the criminal conspiracy. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the evidence. "This is a federal case now," she said. "We're talking about organized crime money laundering and conspiracy involving multiple states. Uncle Thomas, what's our best course of action?" Thomas smiled for the first time since arriving. "We use every resource at our disposal. I may be retired, but I still have friends in the Bureau. And I've been working on white-collar crime cases as a private consultant for the past 3 years." He pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Agent Patricia Daniels, this is Thomas Hartwell. I need to activate an emergency financial crimes investigation." Yes, that Thomas Hartwell. "Multiple federal violations, organized fraud ring, approximately 40 million in assets at risk. I'm sending you documentation now." While Thomas coordinated with federal authorities, Sarah worked on freezing Brad's offshore accounts. We discovered from the banking records that he'd been gradually transferring money to accounts in the Cayman Islands for the past 6 months, but the transfers were still in progress. "If we move fast enough, we can stop the majority of the money before it disappears completely," Sarah explained. "But we need to act within the next few hours." My phone rang, Brad's number. Thomas immediately gestured for me to answer while he activated a recording app on his own device. "Hello, Brad." "Jody, we need to talk." His voice sounded stressed, not at all like the smug confidence from his earlier texts. "I'm listening." "There's been a misunderstanding about the estate sale. I want to make this right, but you need to stop involving lawyers and law enforcement. This can all be resolved quietly." "Now really, how do you propose to resolve stealing my family's property and emptying our bank accounts?" "I'll return half the money from the sale if you sign documents agreeing not to pursue criminal charges. Amanda and I made some mistakes, but we never meant for things to go this far." Thomas was frantically scribbling notes and showing them to me. "Keep him talking. Ask about Gary." "What about Gary Winters? Is he part of your generous offer?" A long pause. "Gary was just the realtor Jody. He didn't do anything wrong." Interesting, because I have evidence that he's been running this exact scam on other families for years. "I don't know what you're talking about. Look, I'm trying to fix this. But if you keep pushing, things might get complicated for everyone involved. Is that a threat, Brad? It's a reality check. Some people don't like being investigated. Some people might take steps to protect themselves. The line went dead. Thomas immediately called Agent Daniels back. We need protective surveillance on Jody's location immediately. The suspects just made veiled threats. Within an hour, our quiet family crisis had become a multi-agency federal investigation. Agent Daniels arrived with a team of investigators who transformed the estate's dining room into a command center. Computer specialists worked to trace Brad's offshore transfers, while financial crimes experts analyzed the pattern of Gary Winter's fraudulent sales. We've been tracking Gary Winters for 8 months, Agent Daniels explained, but we could never get enough evidence to build a case. Your situation gives us everything we need to take down his entire operation. How many families has he victimized? I asked. At least 23 that we know of. Elderly people with medical emergencies, divorced individuals during custody battles, families dealing with job losses or other financial stress. He targets vulnerability and exploits it systematically. The investigation revealed that Amanda Martinez wasn't just Gary's sister. She was a skilled identity theft specialist who had worked for multiple criminal organizations across the Southwest. Her job was to infiltrate target families by getting close to key family members, gathering financial intelligence, and setting up the conditions for theft. She's been Brad's secretary for 8 months, but she's also been 3 other men's girlfriends, 2 women's best friends, and 1 family's trusted housekeeper during that same period, Agent Daniels explained. She's a professional manipulator. But the most shocking revelation came when the FBI traced Brad's offshore bank transfers. The money hadn't gone to the Cayman Islands as we'd assumed. It had gone to a series of accounts in Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona, all controlled by a network of criminals who specialized in targeting inheritance disputes and family property settlements. Your husband isn't the mastermind of this operation, Agent Daniels told me. He's another victim. They probably approached him with what seemed like a legitimate business opportunity, then gradually drew him into deeper and deeper criminal activity. But he sent me those texts from the airport. He was obviously planning to flee to Brazil. Agent Daniels showed me a series of photographs on her tablet. These are surveillance photos from Denver International Airport yesterday. Your husband and Amanda Martinez never boarded any plane to Brazil. In fact, they never even went through security. The photos clearly showed Brad and Amanda in the airport terminal taking selfies in front of departure gates, but then walking toward the exit instead of boarding any aircraft. They staged the Brazil story to make you think they were beyond reach, Agent Daniels continued, but our tracking indicates they're actually hiding somewhere in Colorado, probably waiting for the heat to die down before attempting to flee. Thomas had been quietly making phone calls throughout this briefing. Now he approached with information that changed everything again. I just spoke to a private investigator I've worked with before. He's been tracking the license plates of vehicles seen at Gary Winter's property over the past week. Brad's car was there yesterday afternoon. You mean he's still in contact with Gary? More than that. According to the surveillance, Amanda and Gary met privately for 2 hours while Brad waited in the car. Then, Amanda and Brad left together, but Gary stayed behind. Agent Daniels frowned. That suggests either they're planning their next move together or Amanda and Gary are planning to eliminate Brad as a witness, Thomas finished. He knows too much about their operation to be allowed to disappear cleanly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your husband wants to meet, alone, tonight at 8 p.m., Riverside Park, North Pavilion. Come alone or the deal is off. Agent Daniels immediately began coordinating a surveillance operation. We'll wire you and have teams positioned throughout the park. But Jody, this could be dangerous. If they're planning to eliminate witnesses, walking into their trap could put you at risk too. I thought about my mother lying unconscious in the ICU, about the Victorian estate that had housed 4 generations of my family, about the $40 million in assets that represented centuries of careful stewardship and hard work. Then I thought about all the other families that Gary Winters had victimized, and all the future families he would destroy if we didn't stop him. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want to make sure we get all of them. Not just Brad, but Gary and Amanda too." Thomas squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud of you, Jody. She always said the women in our family were stronger than we looked." As the sun set over the mountains, federal agents positioned themselves throughout Riverside Park, while technicians tested the recording equipment I'd be wearing. Tomorrow, I would learn whether courage was enough to defeat a criminal conspiracy that had been years in the making. But tonight, the real battle would begin. Riverside Park after dark felt like stepping into another world. The daytime joggers and dog walkers had disappeared, leaving behind empty pathways lit by occasional street lamps. I walked slowly toward the north pavilion, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure the recording equipment taped to my chest would pick it up. Agent Daniels's voice crackled softly in my nearly invisible earpiece. "We have eyes on the pavilion. One figure visible appears to be male, sitting on the far bench." As I approached, I could see it was indeed Brad, but he looked nothing like the confident man who had sent me those smug photos just days earlier. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "You came," he said, not looking up as I sat on the opposite end of the bench. "You said you wanted to make things right." He laughed bitterly. "Make things right. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to do. Where's Amanda?" "That's complicated." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Jody, I need you to understand something. When this all started, I thought I was helping our family. Helping us by stealing my inheritance. Gary Winters came to me with what seemed like a legitimate investment opportunity. He said there were families with valuable properties who needed quick sales due to medical emergencies. He offered to let me in on the deals as a buyer's agent, earning commission on each sale." I felt a surge of anger. "So, you thought you'd start with your own wife's property?" "No, God, no. I had no idea Gary was targeting you specifically until it was too late. When your mom had the stroke, I mentioned it to Amanda because I was stressed about the medical bills. The next day, Gary approached me about a perfect opportunity involving a Victorian estate whose owners needed a quick sale." Agent Daniels's voice in my earpiece. "Keep him talking. We need him to implicate the others." "Oh, when did you realize it was our house?" Brad's hands were shaking more violently now. "Not until after I'd signed the paperwork. Gary said the property address was confidential until after closing standard practice for distressed sales. When he showed me the final documents," he trailed off, unable to finish. "You could have stopped it then." "I tried, but Gary said it was too late, that backing out would expose us all to fraud charges. He convinced me that the only safe path was to go through with everything, take the money and disappear until the legal heat died down." What about Amanda? What was her role in all this?" Brad's expression shifted to something that looked like fear. "Amanda isn't who I thought she was, Jody. She isn't who any of us thought she was." "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, I overheard a phone call between her and Gary. They were talking about cleaning up loose ends and eliminating complications. Jody, I think they're planning to kill me." Agent Daniels' voice. "This is crucial information. Keep him talking about the threat." Why would they want to kill you?" "Because I know too much about their operation. Gary showed me files on dozens of other families they've targeted. Elderly people, divorced mothers, families with sick children. They've stolen millions of dollars over the past few years. Then why don't you just go to the police? Because I'm guilty too. I took money from the sale of your house. I signed documents I knew were questionable. Even if I testify against them, I'm still going to prison. He stubbed out his cigarette and immediately lit another one. But there's something else, something that makes this much bigger than simple real estate fraud. What? Ms. Gary has been selling information about the properties to a mining company, not just selling the properties themselves, but providing geological surveys and mineral rights data to companies that specialize in rare earth extraction. My blood turned to ice. What geological surveys? I don't know the details, but Amanda mentioned that your property was special because it contained some kind of valuable mineral deposits. Gary has been working with a company called Mountain States Mining to identify and acquire properties with mining potential. Agent Daniels's voice. This is a major development. Mining companies, mineral rights, organized crime ring. Brad, where are Gary and Amanda right now? That's why I asked you to meet me. They're at a cabin in the mountains about 2 hours from here. They told me to stay in town and wait for further instructions, but I think they're planning to disappear tonight. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. Look at these. Gary keeps asking about your family's financial records, whether you might have other valuable assets. Amanda wants to know if you've contacted lawyers or law enforcement. I read through the messages, my anger growing with each line. They were treating my family's crisis like a business transaction, calculating how much more they could steal before disappearing forever. There's something else, Brad continued. Something I think you need to know about Amanda. What? She's not just Gary's sister. She's also the ex-wife of Detective Martinez, the cop who called you yesterday about irregularities in your case. Agent Daniels' voice. Holy shit. Sorry that wasn't meant for your earpiece. This is bigger than we realized. The corruption extended into law enforcement. Detective Martinez had been trying to sabotage our investigation from the inside, probably warning Gary and Amanda about our every move. Brad, I need you to do something for me. I need you to call Amanda and Gary and tell them you've convinced me to drop all charges. Tell them I'm willing to sign papers agreeing to keep quiet about everything. Why would I do that? Because it's the only way we're going to catch them before they disappear forever. And it's the only way you're going to survive this. He stared at me for a long moment. You're wearing a wire, aren't you? Yes. And there are federal agents watching us right now. Yes. Brad nodded slowly. Good. Because you're right about one thing. If Gary and Amanda get away, I'm a dead man. They can't afford to leave witnesses. He pulled out his phone and dialed Amanda's number. Agent Daniels' voice confirmed they were recording everything. Amanda. It's me. Yeah, I talked to Jody. She's scared and wants this to go away quietly. She'll sign anything if it means avoiding a trial. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the lawyer's office downtown. He listened for a moment, then continued. She doesn't know about the mineral rights or the other assets. As far as she knows, we only took the house sale money. No, she hasn't contacted any federal agencies, just a local lawyer who's trying to scare her into settling. After hanging up, Brad looked directly at me. They're planning to meet you at the lawyer's office, but they're also planning something else, something they didn't want to discuss over the phone. Agent Daniels' voice. We need to know about that cabin location. Get specific directions. Brad, I need you to take me to that cabin. Are you insane if they see me with you? We don't stop them tonight. How many other families will they destroy? How many other people will suffer what my family has been through? He was quiet for several minutes, smoking and staring at the dark water of the river. Finally, he nodded. There's something else you should know, something that Gary let slip yesterday. What? Your Uncle Thomas. Gary knows about him. He knows Thomas used to work for the FBI, and he's been trying to figure out how much Thomas might know about your family's assets. Agent Daniels' voice. Thomas is compromised. We need to adjust our plans immediately. Brad, we're going to that cabin tonight, and we're going to end this before anyone else gets hurt. As we walked back toward the parking area surrounded by invisible federal agents, I thought about my mother in her hospital bed, about the generations of my family who had protected our legacy, and about all the future victims we could save by stopping this criminal enterprise. The trap was set. Now we just had to spring it before they realized they were the ones being hunted. The cabin sat perched on a mountainside overlooking a small alpine lake accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense pine forests. Agent Daniels had positioned surveillance teams along the access route, while technical specialists monitored communications from a mobile command center hidden 2 miles away. Brad sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked federal vehicle, his hands cuffed in front of him for his own protection. He'd agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence and witness protection. They chose this location specifically because it has only one road in and out, Agent Daniels explained through our radio link. But that also means they can't escape if we control the access route. Through infrared surveillance, we could see 3 figures moving around inside the cabin. Gary, Amanda, and a third person we hadn't identified. Who's the third person? I asked Brad. Detective Martinez, he said grimly. He's been part of this operation from the beginning. He feeds them information about which families to target and warns them when investigations get too close. Agent Daniels coordinated with state and federal authorities to ensure Detective Martinez's supervisors were informed about his corruption. Meanwhile, technical specialists worked to intercept communications between the cabin and any outside contacts. They're planning something for tomorrow morning, Agent Daniels reported. We've intercepted communications about a private jet scheduled to depart from a small airfield in Wyoming. They're going to attempt to flee the country after the fake meeting with you. But as we monitored their communications, we discovered something that changed the entire dynamic of the operation. Gary and Amanda weren't just planning to betray Brad. They were also planning to betray Detective Martinez. Listen to this. Agent Daniels played a recording through our communication system. Amanda's voice. The detective has served his purpose. Once we're out of the country, he becomes a liability. Gary's voice. I've already transferred his cut to an account he can't access from prison. By the time he realizes what happened, we'll be untouchable. Detective Martinez's voice. What about the kid, Brad? He still knows too much. Amanda. That problem will be solved tomorrow morning. Make it look like a suicide. Guilt over betraying his wife couldn't live with what he'd done. The plan was becoming clear. Gary and Amanda intended to kill both Brad and Detective Martinez, then flee the country with all the stolen money. They saw their accomplices as loose ends to be eliminated rather than partners to be protected. We need to move now, I said, before they realize we're here. Agent Daniels shook her head. We need more evidence of their criminal activity. Right now we have conspiracy and fraud, but we need them to incriminate themselves regarding the other families they've victimized. What if I go to the cabin? Tell them Brad sent me with new information about my family's assets. Absolutely not. Too dangerous. But Brad had an idea. What if I call them and say Jody found additional documents? Something that proves the mineral rights are worth even more than we thought. Their greed will make them careless. Agent Daniels considered this. It could work, but we need to make sure you're safe when they realize it's a trap. Brad made the call while technical specialists recorded everything. Gary, it's me. I'm still in town like you said, but something happened. Jody found more documents at her grandmother's house. Yeah, mineral surveys, but for a much larger area than we thought. She thinks the mineral rights might be worth 50 million, maybe more. No, she doesn't know we're involved. She called me asking for advice about whether to sell to a mining company. He listened for several minutes, then continued. She wants to meet tomorrow before the lawyer's appointment. She's scared about making the wrong decision. The cabin. Why there? Okay, I'll bring her up in the morning. After hanging up, Brad looked shaken. They want you to come to the cabin tomorrow morning. Gary says it's more private away from potential surveillance. But Amanda was asking questions about whether anyone else knows about the additional mineral rights. Agent Daniels was already coordinating assault teams. They're planning to kill both of you at the cabin tomorrow, then disappear before anyone realizes you're missing. So what do we do? We don't wait for tomorrow. We go in tonight while they think they have the advantage. At 11 p.m., federal assault teams surrounded the cabin while negotiators attempted to establish communication. The response was immediate and violent. Gunfire erupted from multiple windows as Gary, Amanda, and Detective Martinez attempted to fight their way out. They have automatic weapons, Agent Daniels reported. This is definitely not their first armed confrontation. The siege lasted 3 hours. Gary and Detective Martinez barricaded themselves in the main room, while Amanda attempted to escape through a back window. She was captured immediately, but not before destroying computer equipment that contained records of their criminal activities. Detective Martinez tried to negotiate his own surrender, claiming he had information about other corrupt law enforcement officials. But Agent Daniels wasn't interested in deals. You betrayed your oath, endangered innocent families, and conspired to commit murder. The time for negotiation is over. Gary made a final desperate move, threatening to destroy evidence about the other families they'd victimized unless he was guaranteed safe passage to Mexico. Agent Daniels's response was swift and decisive. Mr. Winters, you're surrounded by federal agents with overwhelming firepower. You have 30 seconds to surrender before we use appropriate force to end this situation. The cabin door opened and Gary emerged with his hands raised, followed moments later by a defeated Detective Martinez. As dawn broke over the mountains, all three conspirators were in federal custody. Computer specialists had recovered enough evidence from their equipment to identify 47 families who had been victimized over the past 3 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $15 million. But the most shocking discovery came when Agent Daniels interrogated Amanda about the scope of their operations. This wasn't just about real estate fraud, she explained to me as we drove back toward town. They were part of a larger network that specialized in targeting inheritance disputes, medical emergencies, and family crises. They had connections to corrupt officials in 7 states and had been operating for over 5 years. How many people did they hurt? Hundreds of families, thousands of individuals, elderly people who lost their homes, children who lost their college funds, families who lost their life savings. Your case was actually small compared to some of their other operations. In the back of the federal vehicle, Brad sat quietly, finally comprehending the full scope of what he'd become involved in. I thought I was making a smart business investment, he said softly. I never imagined it would destroy so many lives. You made a choice to betray your wife's trust, Agent Daniels replied. Everything that followed was a consequence of that first decision. As we descended from the mountains, my phone rang. The hospital. Ms. Thompson, this is Dr. Richards. Your mother is awake and asking for you. Her recovery has been remarkable. We think she's going to be just fine. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry tears of relief rather than frustration. The nightmare was finally ending and my family was going to survive. But there was still one more chapter to write in this story. Justice had been served, but healing would take much longer. 6 months later, I stood in the fully restored Victorian estate, watching my mother tend to her garden through the kitchen window. Her recovery had been slow but complete, and she'd insisted on personally overseeing every detail of returning the house to its original condition. The Henderson family had been wonderful throughout the legal proceedings. When they learned about the fraud, they immediately agreed to return the property in exchange for full compensation from the seized criminal assets. They'd even helped with some of the restoration work, saying they felt honored to have played a small role in preserving our family's legacy. Sarah Wells knocked on the front door carrying a thick folder of legal documents. The final paperwork, she announced. Gary Winters received 25 years for organized fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Amanda Martinez got 20 years for her role as the inside operative. Detective Martinez received 15 years and lost his pension for corruption and conspiracy. And Brad? May do 7 years with possibility of parole in 5 if he continues cooperating with investigations into other criminal networks. His testimony has already helped convict 6 other people involved in similar schemes. I signed the papers that officially closed the legal case, then walked with Sarah to the back porch, where we could see the entire 40 acres of mineral-rich land stretching toward the mountains. The mining partnership is working out well, Sarah asked. Se, better than we ever imagined. The mining company agreed to pay us a 25% royalty on all extracted minerals, plus a guaranteed minimum annual payment of $2 million. Between that and the recovered assets from the criminal enterprise, we'll be able to help rebuild the lives of dozens of families who were victimized. Uncle Thomas emerged from the old carriage house where he'd been working on converting the space into offices for our new family foundation. The Hartwell Foundation for Fraud Victims would provide legal aid, financial counseling, and emergency assistance to families targeted by inheritance scams and property fraud. MIT's 43 families helped so far, Thomas reported, and the FBI is using our model to create similar programs in other states. My phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Patterson, who had become the foundation's first volunteer coordinator. New family needs help in Denver. Elderly woman, sick husband, grandson trying to steal their farm. It's some things never change, I murmured, but I was already reaching for my car keys. Each family we helped felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to destroy us. That evening, I sat with Mom on the front porch swing, watching the sun set behind the mountains. She'd regained most of her strength and all of her sharp wit. "Do you ever regret fighting back so hard?" she asked. "It would have been easier to just accept the loss and start over." I thought about Brad serving his time in federal prison and writing letters I still hadn't decided whether to read. I thought about the Henderson family, who'd become close friends despite the strange circumstances of our meeting. I thought about Uncle Thomas, whose expertise and connections had made justice possible. I thought about all the families we'd been able to help through the foundation. "No," I said finally. Fighting back was the only choice that honored what our family built over generations. Grandmother didn't hide those assets so we could give up when things got difficult. She hid them so we'd have the resources to fight when fighting became necessary. "And what did you learn from all this?" I considered the question carefully. I learned that trust is earned through consistent actions, not promises. I learned that protecting family legacy sometimes requires courage we don't know we possess until we're tested. I learned that the worst betrayals can lead us to discover inner strength we never imagined we had. And I learned that family bonds, when tested by real crisis, can emerge stronger than ever. Uncle Thomas and I lost 5 years because of pride and stubbornness. This crisis forced us to remember that family is more important than old grievances. Mom smiled and squeezed my hand. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said the women in our family were stronger than we appeared. She was right, but she also taught us that strength isn't about avoiding betrayal or protecting ourselves from all possible harm. Real strength comes from rising above betrayal with integrity and using our experiences to help others who face similar challenges. As darkness settled over our restored estate, I thought about the future. The foundation was growing, our family relationships were stronger than ever, and the Victorian house would continue sheltering future generations. The mineral rights would provide ongoing income for decades, but more importantly, they would fund programs to help other families protect their own legacies. Brad's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed resources and family connections I'd never known existed. His greed had led him to destroy our marriage, but it had also led us to discover the criminals who were victimizing families across multiple states. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the most meaningful work we'll ever do. Sometimes betrayal teaches us who we really are and what we're truly capable of accomplishing. 3 years later, the Hartwell Foundation had helped over 200 families recover from various forms of inheritance fraud. Uncle Thomas had come out of retirement to lead a national task force on elder financial abuse. Our family's Victorian estate had become a model for heritage preservation programs across the country. And I had learned that home isn't just a place where you live. Home is a legacy you protect, a foundation you strengthen, and a gift you pass forward to future generations who will face their own battles and need their own resources to fight them. The clock had indeed struck midnight that terrible night in the ICU waiting room, but morning had come, bringing not just justice but purpose healing and the deep satisfaction that comes from turning personal pain into public service. Now, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted betrayed that trust in a devastating way? How did you find the strength to fight back, and what did that experience teach you about your own resilience? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might help someone else who's facing their own moment of betrayal and wondering whether they have the courage to fight back. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength in impossible situations. And please share this with anyone who might be facing their own family crisis, because sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're stronger than we think we are. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, no matter how dark the midnight hour becomes, morning always finds a way to break through. Stay strong, protect what matters, and never underestimate the power of a family that refuses to give up.